Hey guys, what did you think about my conversation with Patricio? Wasn't he great? Let me know how you're enjoying the podcast. I would love to know your thoughts and if you had any light bulb moments, eye roll moments, or just straight up laugh out loud moments. You can always reach me through our website at vidatennispodcast.com or by email at vidatennispodcast@gmail.com. And isn't technology great? Isn't it amazing that we can listen to podcasts, share information, connect with people around the world in an instant? I love technology and I wish I knew even more about it and got to use even more tools. But it can be hard to catch up with it sometimes. It keeps evolving and sometimes you master one and by the time that happens, there's already another one that's bigger and better out there. But I think it is important to at least be aware of all the different tools that are out there. I mean, the point of technology is to improve our lives, right? To make things easier, save us time, give us information, and so forth. There are plenty of new technologies happening in tennis, both on and off the court. And I have covered my favorite off-court one, which is CRMs, in episode 12 titled 5 Things You Need from Your CRM System, where I went into great detail on how you can use it in your tennis business. Hopefully you will find that useful, but honestly, if you're still using paper to keep track of registrations, billings, or even court reservations, you better check yourself before you wreck yourself. And I'm only half kidding. Another tool that I have been really into lately, probably since last summer, is ChatGPT. If you're not familiar with it for whatever reason, you need to get on that. It's a huge tool that you can use to help you with most projects, presentations, emails, you name it. It's kind of like having a free virtual assistant. And well, obviously podcasting is one of my favorite technologies. I'm sure that if you listen to Vida Tennis, you're probably already listening to other podcasts. And of course, I love listening to podcasts. I now listen to them more often than music. If I'm cleaning or driving, it's very likely that I am listening to a podcast. I listen to many different ones covering everything: mindfulness, self-improvement, business, comedy, and of course, tennis. Maybe someday I will share my list of favorite podcasts with you. And what about my least favorite? Believe it or not, hands down, social media. I am on social media as Vida Tennis Podcast, but not to the extent that I should be according to the experts. I like that we can stay connected there and it's great for killing time when you're waiting in line, but I really struggle with it. I struggle to keep up with it, and I have been trying to post more the last few weeks to just promote the podcast and whatnot, but honestly, the struggle is real. So please give our stuff a like every now and then if you see it, especially on Instagram. It would be really nice, really cool to grow the Vida Tennis account on there, but it is pretty tough because apparently you're supposed to post at least once a day. Yikes. Anyway, today we are not focusing on off-court technologies. We are actually focusing on on-court coaching technologies. And Andy Durham from RacketStats was great. I have no doubt you will enjoy the conversation. And if you're working with tournament players, league players, or college players, this is absolutely a tool you should consider using in your day-to-day coaching. Analytics is a great tool for gaining information for us to use as coaches. And yeah, you should definitely check it out at least. If you are enjoying the podcast and would like to show your support, please leave us a review on your podcast platform or share it on social media. It really means the world to me. I hope you're enjoying having professional tennis on US soil like I am. I will be at the Miami Open this weekend. I'm really excited. And I'm also going to RacketX. Hopefully, I will see some of you there. Get ready to hear from one of the best out there, only here at Vida Tennis. Enjoy. Welcome to Vida Tennis, the podcast for those of us who eat, sleep, breathe tennis. Today, we welcome Andy Durham, founder of RacketStats, a smartphone tennis analytics app for parents, players, and coaches to the podcast. Andy has been teaching tennis for about 50 years. He has worked with players from A to 80, beginners to ATP and WTA pros, and he's a member of the PTR and the USPTA. And he has a wealth of experience with companies in analytics and coaching. And he even oversaw the analytics for HBO's Wimbledon presentations, providing useful insights to commentators Arthur Ashe, Billie Jean King, and Barry McKay. He is on a mission to inform the public that the average tennis player can leverage data analytics and gain invaluable information about their game. Welcome, Andy, to Vida Tennis. How are you?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And isn't it wonderful that we can do this and be in different places?
I know, right? Technology is great. And I love the use of technology in tennis, right? Because that's my world. But I want to also learn about you before we get into all the analytics and all the numbers and all the awesome stuff that you're doing. Walk us kind of through how you started coaching. How did you get started in the tennis industry?
I took over from who was a high school coach. He wanted to take his family on a vacation. So he said, come on down to the courts and see what we're doing so you'll know what you're doing. This is 1971. So I went down there, and of course it was chaos. Coaching was not at the level it is now, but he taught me one thing that's important in coaching, and that is we need people to bring people into the sport. And sometimes it's not necessarily the best player or the most talented person. Sometimes it's the shop teacher at the high school, or it's the mom. In Eve Craft's back in the 70s, Eve Craft got the Princeton method started, and she was totally responsible for really what coaches are learning today for a number of reasons. But I mean, it could be anybody. And they may be qualified, they may not be qualified, but we need a whole different tier of kinds of coaches. And so anyway, I took over and I loved it. And I was teaching fourth grade at the time. And I made more money in the summertime than I did my whole year teaching in the fourth grade. I miss teaching. I miss the kids. But it led me to a career for the last 50 years. It's been wonderful.
I can tell this is going to be good already because what you just said is so important. And I want to really highlight that we need to bring other people to tennis. It can't just be on the coaches and the leaders in the tennis industry. We need to get everyone to bring people in. And that's where pickleball is now. It's like they're all bringing their friend, right? It's that whole concept of bring your friend to tennis. I think it's huge and something that we are missing for a multitude of reasons. But I want to also kind of learn how you started getting into the whole analytics side. When did you start doing, say, the most basic type of analytics or tracking of any kind as a coach? Was that in the last 10 years, or do you think you've been doing that for a long time now?
I was fortunate in that, in many respects, back in the day, there was Vic Braden, Dennis Vandermeer. We're about the only ones to run coaching clinics. So as soon as I found out about them, I mean, they were brand new. No, they'd never done this. So I went to Dennis Vandermeer's second pro clinic out in Lake Tahoe, and basically learned how bad I was as a tennis player and how all the things I needed to do and learn to become a good coach. Well, at the same time, I was up in Philadelphia coaching, and I got an opportunity to go down to Washington, D.C. And in the course of teaching, there was a father and a little boy next to me almost every week during the same lesson, and they were there during the week. And it was the father just trying to do the best he could with it. And eventually he came over and he said, hey, I think I'm spent. I don't know what to do now. Would you mind helping me? So I started. And you talk about working with parents. A lot of people don't like them. I happen to love working with parents because their role in developing a tennis player is just outstanding. I mean, I think Nick Bollettieri at one point said that coach's role is important, but a parent's role is tenfold more important. You have so many avenues. Anyway, the father didn't know anything about tennis. He was not a tennis player, and neither was his wife, and he's trying to help this boy along. Anyway, so I would show him in a lesson what we needed to work on, and then he would spend the rest of the week working on it. And then they'd come back again and I'd give him another lesson, and then he would do that. So he is totally responsible for the development of his son. And all I did was offer some advice. Now that went on for 8 years? And he got to be number 4 in the world. He played Junior Davis Cup, he played Wimbledon, he played all that stuff, went to Arkansas on a scholarship. So it just proved to me that you can work with parents and get started. And that's how I really got my start.
And at that time, what kind of tracking or analytics were you doing?
In the process of that, I remember I started in 72. In 82, a fellow by the name of Bill Jacobson developed the first analytics laptop computer. Matter of fact, it's the actual laptop is in the Smithsonian. Holds up. Show you what. Bingo. He's the father. Bill Jacobson is the father of what you might call electronic statistics and analytics. And this is the thing that did it. He sold a couple hundred of these. With these, we did pro events. We did all the national junior events. Some parents actually bought them, but this is how it got started. Anyway, wow. I heard about that, and I flew out to San Francisco to his office, bought one, and on the way back, I'm making up points and stuff like that, and I instant love. I just could see what this thing was capable. His company, which was Sports Software, had just started. They had a deal with Stanford and Dick Gould, Frank Brennan, and it was all in the development stages, and it was wonderful. But that's one of the reasons, for instance, that we used it with Joey exclusively because of where we wanted him to go. And we also Bill was building a database of where he needed to be. In other words, what were the guys better than him doing? What were the guys in the next age group doing? And so we used this to kind of hone what we thought Joey would need. Anyway, and it worked out beautifully. And in the semifinals of the Canadian Open Juniors, he played Christian Bergson, and he lost in a match. And we did the analytics. Well, it so happened that they met again in the semifinals of the U.S. Open Juniors that same year. And what we noticed was that Christian would block back first serves, but he would attack second serves. So we said, Joey, real easy. Get your first serve in. And he won. So, I mean, analytics can be really, really simple. It doesn't have to be lots of numbers and diagrams and all that, like a lot of the TV commentators make it look so complicated because they're capable of getting that data through cameras that are stationed all over the stadium and computers galore, and they have the best analysts in the world. But that's tens and tens of thousands of dollars. And of course, most parents can't do that, especially the ones of developing players. And that's where CompuTennis didn't get to. And that's where, how many of the kids that you grew up in were quit by the time they were like 15? Mm-hmm. Yeah, a huge number, 50%. Yeah. I mean, the same thing here in the United States right now. We bring in a whole ton of kids at the lower levels, but we lose them. And one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons is that they don't really know if they're getting better. If you've watched the documentary series about the pros that are on TV right now, it's a nice series.
Right point.
Anyway, and they had Sabalenka screaming at her coach, would somebody please tell me if I'm getting better?
Yeah. That was great. Yeah. That's so cool. And I've never seen that machine you just showed us. For anyone listening, you have to check out the YouTube video if you want to take a look at this thing that he just showed us, it looks really cool. Was that designed just for tennis analytics, or was there other uses for that one in particular?
Oh, there were other uses. It was the Epson 120, which was the first laptop word processing or computer. You could use it for inventory, and it's in the Smithsonian. Oh. So it was a number one. But yeah. Bill knew people with Apple that helped design the Apple II and all that, and he had them basically gut it and redefine all the keys so that we had forehands, backhands, return serves, and you could do some really sophisticated stuff with it. And on top of that, he was the first one to use this computer to get that information to TV commentators. It was the very first use of statistics, because now the TV commentators, like when I worked with Billie Jean and Arthur Ashe, they're watching a lot of different matches. They are not watching just one match, but they sound like they are. And how are they getting that? They're getting it from statisticians. Hey, this is what's happening in this match. This is what's happening in that match. And we send them a little note on a card, or we usually had headphones so we could talk to them. And they would say in the break, what's going on blah, blah, blah. And we could do it because we were in a little cabin in the back. And they had TV monitors in front of us so we could watch the match. We could also get all our analytics on there. So we kept track of what it is. And most of the time we just pencil and paper, we'd make notes as to they're serving better to the deuce court, or they're not returning well on the ad court or on first serves or whatever. And we could show them because we had a database of the player, and we could see where they were varying from their match in this particular match, good or bad.
Right. And how much more helpful that it would be for the actual player to get that information at the time, even more so than the commentators, right?
Right. Analytics can be really handy for high school and college coaches because they can talk to you.
Right.
But very few colleges are using it. When Bill threw CompuTennis, there were over 100 colleges that were using this. And the list from Stan Smith to Billie Jean King, I mean, just Arthur Ashe used it in Davis Cup to effect. So it was used widely, but the problem is that little laptop back then was $3,500, which would be $7,000 now or something like that. So it was not affordable. And that was the issue because the internet hadn't really come along. Certainly smartphones weren't there.
For sure. I mean, I coached college, I don't think that long ago. I mean, I'm sure we had apps and I just wasn't familiar with them, but I had little sheets that I created myself for tracking matches, and I would have like the girls on the team go and track the matches of their teammates to kind of show them later on and paint a picture of what the match actually looked like, because sometimes you're so wrapped up in emotions and other things going on that you don't have a clear vision of what actually happened in the match. So I think it's super, super useful. But how often do you think players are using it on the tour? And how often do you think parents or players are using it on junior tournaments at any level?
Very seldom. I think one of the issues for the industry is that there are all these sophisticated ways of getting all the data. I don't know if you've ever seen a printout. I mean, like Bill could produce like 12 pages of data on your match. Well, for the parent and the coach, it's very hard to sift through that to understand what's really important. Right. And I think as an industry, we need to work on it. I know I've got a major upgrade coming up in which we're approaching that. We're trying to simplify it for the parent. So you can get this information, but what do you do with it? And how do you translate over to the player that's on the court? I think you have it right. If you have 6 matches in progress and you've got 6 volunteers or non-players, I think even at the high school level, most coaches have a problem with too many kids that want to play, and most of them are maybe not very good. So all you got to do is train those kids on how to chart matches, and you assign them a court and say, hey, and as they do this match after match, then they will learn what's important, what's not important. Hey, Johnny's not doing this, or Sarah's not doing this, or they are doing this, whatever. And as a coach, you can actually keep track of, like you said, okay, we need to get into the net on this one, or we need to stay back, or you need to be more aggressive, or whatever. And you can find that out with most of the analytics programs out there as the match is going on. So at the bottom level, it's not being used much at all. We have one pro who's Bob Clark out of England, who's working with levels 300 and 400 kids, ladies, particularly, and he's using it extensively, and he's just constantly amazed because people will come up to him and say, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm charting the match. Oh, why? I mean, like, okay. And parents are bamboozled. They don't want to be distracted or whatever, but actually it's very good for them as a pacifier because it gives them something positive to do.
There's so many positives to it. And I saw it when I used it, even though it was super basic and archaic. It really gave us a lot of information and also kept all the players engaged in the match. So not just the player that was playing, but also the player that was charting the match. They knew what was going on. They were learning also from watching. And yeah, it was really good. And I think this is a great mission that you're on to get parents to do this.
By the way, you are so correct in what you said. That's something I was going to bring up later on. People who do the charting learn as much as anybody else on what's going on.
Yeah.
And gradually parents begin to really understand. I had one parent come up to me and they had worked with their son and they were always, oh, he says, I'm so negative. And he said, I used to chew, yelling, why did you double fold, blah, blah. Anyway, when I started doing the analytics on him, I found out he was pretty good. So I apologized and I said, I'm sorry, but actually you're pretty good.
That's funny. And how difficult is it for the parents to track? Let's say using RacketStats or any other, and we can talk about the different applications that are out there, but how user friendly is it? Just kind of walk us through that a little bit.
If I were to put it in basic terms, the more complicated you want your statistics to be, the more difficult it is to get them in. There are just too many, there's too little time between points.
Yeah.
For instance, like Ion Court, which is used at the collegiate level, and it does a great job of broadcasting what's going on. So if you were a coach, you'd have your players using Ion Court because they could send it to anybody and people can pick up on it and know where the match is. It gives the basics to score, and then it has some stats below it, so you can follow the match pretty easily. But in general,
this is an app.
Yeah, Ion Court. It's an app. It's a free app, and it's one of the ones that I'll mention later on.
Okay.
So just keeping that in mind, if you want something that's going to give you all sorts of information, it sometimes can be difficult. Some you put your phone up there and you have to use your finger to draw where the ball goes and stuff like that. And that can be very complicated. One, if you're a lady with fingernails, and two, if you got big thumbs and all that. Most of them now are converted over to either boxes or tabs or stuff that you can just tap. Makes it very easy. I think what you have to do with the availability of them out there, if you're interested in it, is to find one that gives you the information you want. How complicated do you want it? How simple do you want it? And some people want just simple stuff, and which is fine, because as you did with your paper and pencil, simple's better than nothing.
Yeah. And you still get a ton of information that you don't realize, even as a coach, and especially as a college coach, because you might have 6 matches going on. You don't have 6 pairs of eyes and your brain can't process everything that's going on every court. So to have that information really, really is invaluable.
The other thing about analytics is that, okay, some produce 10 statistics, some produce 50. It doesn't matter, because of all the stats that you get, there are generally only 3 or 4 that are important. They're not that many, particularly during a match, because you can't change a player during the match. In practice with your developmental plans and that sort of thing, you can do that, but not in a match. So the difficulty is in sorting out what's really important and what isn't of all the information, because there's far more information than most people can handle, certainly during a match.
I think even during a match, like if you look at, say, the first set, say a player lost the first set, and you take a quick look at kind of what happened, you can give the player a lot of feedback just based off that first set and help them kind of come up with a plan. That's the beauty of college tennis, is that you have that on-court coaching going on. So I think, yeah, for college it's huge. But what about in other sports? Like, do you see, is tennis behind? Is tennis ahead? How often are players using it in other sports?
We're the only sport that's beginning to catch up. We're decades behind. Anybody who's been in baseball, basketball, particularly track. I mean, track, to get most valuable statistics, what do you need? A stopwatch and a measuring stick.
Right.
And I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but that's the easiest one to track, because if you're running, you want to decrease your time. If you're jumping, you want to jump higher, that sort of thing, or jump farther. Yeah. So it's very simple to track. So those sorts of things have been around for decades. Tennis, it just hasn't caught on. You had, the first fellow that actually did it with any effect was a guy by the name of Bruce S. Old. He was in college with Bitsy Grant, who nobody will remember at this point. But anyway, that was his college roommate. So what he used to do is chart using paper and pencil and the court diagram and stuff like that. Well, when in college tennis back then, between the second and the third set, if there was one, there was a break. So Bitsy Grant would come over and he'd show him the drawings about. Bitsy Grant was only 5'4", I think. And so he could be lobbed or passed pretty easily. So he went up to the net and he got passed a lot. Well, Bruce would show him where he was getting passed. Well, this little short guy made it to quarterfinals of Wimbledon and the US Open and all that, being his size. But that was where he got started. But anyway, just to kind of show you what he did, he started charting for, what was it, 10 years? And paper and pencil and all this sort of thing. And he finally came up with writing books about singles and doubles. And these were the first applications of statistics, but not like you and I know them. This goes back to your college days. Ta-da!
Oh, wow.
Drawings. So he would draw points, sample points out as to how these top players won their points. And he did the same thing in doubles. Yeah. So he wrote, I believe it's 4 books on tennis, and they sold all right. Nobody wanted to publish him, so he finally met with Bill Talbert, and between the two of them, they got these 4 books published. And then he worked until the 50s, and then he had other things to do, but he was the one who got it started. And then Bill Jacobson came in the early 80s, like 30 years later, because of the computer. Now we're in the era of the smartphone. So for once and for all, parents, anybody with a smartphone has access to analytics.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. That diagram gives me a headache just to look at that. It's like just so many lines to follow there. But I guess that if you have the brain for it,
yep,
you can spend some time analyzing it. And then what about within tennis? Any stats out there that stick out in the men's game compared to the women's game, or any stats that you want to share with us?
Bill Jacobson, they kind of folded. He retired from that in the mid-90s. In keeping track with all the stats, with all the current players, most coaches would say, oh, the game has totally changed. The only thing that has changed analytically is the percentage of time they go in the net. That's it. First serve percentage is roughly the same. Everything else is roughly the same. I couldn't believe it because I started doing the pro matches off TV like everybody else and adding it to my database. I had a database of pros up until the mid-90s. I was anxious to compare, and it was amazing. Now, Warren Pretorius with Tennis Analytics is much more sophisticated, and he can break it down into many more parts than I can. Yeah. But from my standpoint, the stats that we used in the 90s are almost the same as they are now, and almost at all levels, which is shocking.
And the points are a lot longer now, wouldn't you think, or is that wrong?
No, I suppose that's one thing. If you look below maybe the top 30 or 40, that may be true, because there are players out there who can run. I mean, Nadal, for instance, is not what you would call an offensive player, but a defensive player. But he certainly can turn from defense to offense very quickly. But that's not his mainstay. He wants to wear you down, and he can outrun anything you can hit. Now, at the bottom, that may be true, but I don't chart those matches, so I don't know. I just know up at the top, it hasn't changed an awful lot. Craig O'Shaughnessy really brought, I suppose, awareness to analytics in tennis and how you could use it at a top level, which is far more sophisticated than what most parents really need. They're more worried about, at the developing stage, okay, what's my forehand look like? What's the result on the court? And then it's sort of up to people like you and coaches to say, well, okay, the kid's forehand is bad because he's weak, he doesn't move well, got wrong footwork, it's balance is off. It could be 25 different things, including this one. So that's the coach's decision. Analytics can only point out what's actually happening.
And can you think of any common misconceptions that are completely busted by analytics? Maybe misconceptions in the coaching world or even in the understanding of tennis by parents that you've worked with that are busted by analytics?
First serve percentage falls generally right around 50, 55% as normal. The pros are a little bit higher, but they're more sophisticated. And so you have the parent saying, well, why are you missing your first serve? So if you tell a kid in the 16s, I don't want you to miss the first serve, they're going to get double bagelled. So
Yeah.
they can't do anything. So it's how effective. But no, I don't think an awful lot, because I think coaches are so much more educated now than they used to be. So the myths have pretty much disappeared. Vic Braden started that years ago with the myths that were out there and what was really true. Like you close your racket face over to get forehand. You roll your wrist over the forehand to get topspin and stuff. I mean, it's just, there were all sorts of silly things back then. But now it's pretty universal.
I was thinking more in the terms of, yeah, like you were talking about the first serve percentage and things like that. That, when you look at the numbers, is like, oh, it's not really what I expected. And I think even though, yeah, coaches are a lot more educated now, I think, like you were saying, the analytics side is a little bit behind, and you might be familiar with it on a professional level, but I would think it's going to look completely different at the junior level, and especially the different level tournaments for juniors, right? It's going to look completely different. So yeah, I think the numbers definitely can tell a different story. Or what about like in adults, in women's club? I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
they ever track their matches.
Yep. Yeah, it's some of the apps do singles and doubles, some don't. Ours doesn't. We haven't gotten into that point yet, but yeah, no, all sorts of things. Because with the CT 120, I did doubles as well, and Billie Jean used to use a lot of and there was pairings. Instead of looking at like, I want to play with my best friend, I want to play, if I'm really strong on the forehand, I really need to play with somebody who returns well on the ad court. And that's the way she used it. And she based a lot of it on singles matches. So she could pair the stronger sides and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of clever coaches out there who can use basic analytics to do all sorts of interesting things. For instance, one of the things when you were coaching in college, can you think of what was one of the main themes of your coaching to get the kids better? Was there something that you tried to emphasize but they wouldn't do?
Oh, yeah, of course. But one of the main things, actually, because the last time I coached college was at a junior college, so I was working with a lot of freshmen. So they did not know how to play doubles. No idea how to play doubles, were uncomfortable at the net for the most part. So understanding the doubles court, finding courage at the net, all those things, being confident really at the net was a huge thing for us. And yeah, that's where using the numbers really, really helped, because like convincing a player to cover the middle and give up the alley, things like that. Once you see the numbers, then things start clicking.
Yeah, even at the college level, it's amazing how many people don't volley well. And of course, as a coach, I've always felt that when you're teaching a young lady or a young man, you work on their ground strokes. And you
Yeah.
work on their ground strokes and you work on their ground strokes because they're too small to go to the net. Well, but the problem is that when they're 10, the balls are soft. They're floating, they're not scary. Well, if you wait to teach somebody to volley till they're 15 or 14 or something like that, when their opponents are hitting 90-mile-an-hour forehands, that's kind of scary. And it's like, okay. And that's a coaching decision for people who work at the developing stages, that they should know that even though the kids don't necessarily win there, we've got to focus on the entire game. So being an all-court player for the young ones is important. And then as they get older, they can pick and choose whether they're going to be aggressive baseline, whether they're going to be serve and volley, whatever it is going to be.
And I think the game is starting to change again. I think that's what I really like Carlos Alcaraz, is because he's bringing a new flavor to the game. He's starting to use the drop shot, the lob, like things that we didn't see for many, many years. Players are starting to come more to the net. I mean, even Novak, that's how he kind of started to figure out how to beat Carlos. So it's really exciting to see, even in today's high level and fast paced ball, to see those changes.
Well, people don't realize that the pros are probably those guys are working harder on their game than anybody else that's behind them. That's
Yeah.
why they're still at the top. And they always are looking, can all I need, because some of these matches are within 10 points of the winner and the loser. And so how do I recover 6 points? Because that means I'm up another point. I've won the match if I can win 6 more points, because they don't.
Yeah.
So little things like this, and they're very sophisticated. They've got access to all the stuff that's out there, and scouting, which is, by the way, scouting is one of the major things that you can do with analytics, all these programs, and
Yes.
you can build up a library. I believe it was in Southern Cal at one point years ago when they didn't have any of this stuff. And if you played somebody that was outside the California area, you wrote up a little report on them as to what their strengths and weaknesses, and they put it in a file and they kept it there so that other players who might play that same person. So scouting has always been a major thing. It's just that I think we got off track a long time ago where, I'm sorry, my kid's better than you. I'm not going to play you, and I'm not going to give you any information. I'm not going to give anybody information on anybody.
Yeah.
And I think we're beginning to get away from it. But parents have the ability to chart as many matches as they want when they go to these tournaments, and they can build a database of all opponents.
And coaches too. I think any coach that works with a competitive player, this is a huge thing to kind of take their coaching to the next level, is to really get into all of this. Yeah, like scouting other players. Like the player's not gonna have the time necessarily to do that because they're focusing on their own game and doing other things. So as a coach, to be able to provide a report and yes, talk to the player and tell them what's going on, but take that off their plate. I think it's a huge advantage. And you see in every sport, like even on these shows on Netflix about the quarterbacks, like all the information that they get.
Yeah.
And people don't realize all the things that are going on behind the scenes.
Right. And it's always a lot more in depth. But getting back to your comment, of all the coaches that you know, what percentage of them are able to take time off to go to tournaments with their players?
Not a lot, unless they're a private coach, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there's the problem for, quote, developing players. They're not good enough yet to actually have a coach come there. So who's there? Mom and dad, or somebody is taking them there. And that's the area I think that we have to reach as an industry is, I don't have time to go follow 10 kids to 5 different tournaments and see them. And if I am, got 2 and I'm watching players, or I'm trying to get another player, all those responsibilities that you've always had, you can't really focus unless you're really one-on-one. So all those years, those 4 or 5 years that are so important to the development of kids, comes down to the analytics is going to be gathered by their parents or friends.
And what about the price for using these apps? Is that, I don't know, like a limitation, you think? Or like what's the cost per se for using an application for tracking and analytics?
Well, there are 3 different levels where a parent can get information, or a player. The most expensive one would be, well, I won't say the most expensive one is when you are ATP or WTA and you get the analytics from sophisticated computers. But you're talking $100,000 a year for that information. So forgetting that, because you couldn't get it one way or the other, you can go to a fixed court where you get like PlaySite, where it's already set up for you. They have like a tower in the middle and they have cameras there, and you kind of check in and it starts filming, whether you're doing drills or whatever it is, and it will spit out video and analytics, numbers and stuff for you. But those courts are very expensive to set up. There's a company called Wingfield now that is now doing kind of the same thing, where they can video you and analyze your match while you're practicing. But again, there's only a handful of them around, and they're very expensive. So that's one way you can look at it. Like the site down in Orlando has a lot of play sites set up. Yeah. So you can go there, and I don't know what the fees are, but you pay for the match. Now, if you drop down to things like Swing Vision, those aren't that expensive. They're a little bit more affordable for everybody, and your annual. And what they rely on, the middle ones, which I call the mobile analytics, is for you to put a camera or a phone on the back fence, and you can have the whole thing videoed. You send it off to them. They will send you the video in a shortened form, so you don't have to waste time and get through the points faster. And they'll also give you analytics. The only downside to any of those, by the way, Warren Pretorius's tennis analytics works that way. There's a company called Spin Insight out of India that does that for like Wake Forest University and all that, where you can send your videos. The only downside is some of the junior tournaments, and particularly the lower level, it's had to say, of the ITF tournaments, they don't allow you to have a camera or use a phone or do any sort of computer stuff. Because why? Betting. All the betting has invaded the industry. And so a lot of the decisions now are being made by those kind of people. So it's too bad. But anyway, that's the downside of you as a parent putting your phone on the back. You're not allowed to. So then you come down to the ones that are really affordable. I mean, we're talking free to $50, $60 a year. Some are a bit more expensive, the more sophisticated ones. But it's not that much. I mean, it's one tennis lesson or two tennis lessons. And you get it on your phone. Anybody can do it. You can hand it over, husband, wife, other kids. And those are the ones that really are going to, I think, really get the developing players help. Those dozen apps, you can get them on Android, you can get them on Apple, iOS.
Thank you for walking us through that. I didn't realize that you weren't able to videotape matches. Is that for all junior matches?
No, just some. But you have to check with them. Now, the big tournaments like the Orange Bowl, they video it for you. So you can, and then you buy the video. I think it's $65 or something like that, where you can buy the video and then you can have it sent off.
Okay.
So I tell you, I've got a little story to pass on there. And this is about particularly RacketStats, but it's symbolic of what you can get off of it. I had a fellow that his daughter was in the Orange Bowl, and I met them over at the Eddie Herr. And I explained what RacketStats was all about. And he said, well, okay, yeah, but we're in the middle of tournaments. Anyway, so they went down, played the Orange Bowl, and he bought the video off of it and went back and he sent it to somebody to analyze. Then he emailed me from Hong Kong and he said, what would RacketStats do with this? And I said, well, download the app, take it off the video, and then send me the report and I'll tell you. Anyway, so that's exactly what he did. So I looked through all the stats and I gave him some opinions on certain things. He said, I paid a couple $100 just to get that. So you can do it off of sophisticated analytics is one thing, but you can get it off of these apps that are available today.
That's awesome. And what about, can you share a success story, like one where you just saw the big impact that this has in a player's game, whether it's a junior or someone that made it to the pros? Do you have any story there?
I was working with a lady who is number 2 in Great Britain, Sarah Gomer. She was a ground stroker, but she had such strong strokes, she hesitated to go to the net. Anyway, I was the director of tennis at Wentworth at that point, which had grass courts. So before Wimbledon, we worked out on a lot of things. And we noticed that in her first round opponent was one of the Maleva sisters, and who was a ground stroker. Didn't go to the net, just was a ground stroker. And we thought, well, if you stay back against her, are you better than she is? And the answer is no. So your only hope is to get the net. So for 4 weeks, we worked on getting to the net and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And the result was she upset her in the first round of Wimbledon. So you can use stats not only as scouting, but you can build up game plans and you have time to work on it as you get better.
Yeah. How long have you been in this world of RacketStats? How long have you been with RacketStats?
Well, what happens is that computer actually died 5 years ago. And so I had nothing.
They don't make them like that anymore.
No, they don't. So I started looking around at the apps that were available at the time, and I couldn't find one that I was comfortable with getting the information out of it or inputting the information or for one reason or the other. And I thought, well, with my background, I called Bill Jacobson and I said, hey, Bill, would you mind me doing an app based on CompuTennis? And he said, absolutely not. So that's when I hired a company out of Chicago to actually do the developing and built it. And it's been out for 3 years. And now we're coming out with a major update probably by the end of March that is I think is going to make it something special.
Cool. And are you still coaching?
Oh, I would love to, but I don't have time. The only coaching I get in now is in meeting with coaches. showing them what it can do for their programs. I suppose one of the hesitancies going back to your days of coaching is if you're the director of tennis at a junior facility and you've got programs for your better ones, how do you get the stats? Because parents aren't around, you can't do it. So we're coming up with creative ways for coaches to do it, either through paying players. I mean, if I were a parent and I knew there was some high school kid out there who could chart the matches or practice match at the facility, sure, I'd pay him $10. Why not? That's cheap compared to all the other stuff you put in there. So some coaches are getting kids paid by parents to do the matches, and it's two parents, so the cost is half. Each put in $5. The other thing is that because you brought it up earlier, it's a training method. People who do the charting, they actually learn. So they take half the juniors or whatever, and they have them charting while the other ones play, and then vice versa. So they share their time with it. So there are a lot of ways of getting it done, but it does take some extra work. But when you compare the effectiveness of what analytics is going to do for coaches and parents and players by using this at an early stage to the entrance of the videotape or the ball machine or cardio tennis or any of the new the red, orange, green ball. Some coaches are going to adapt to it, and it's extra work because they got to learn how to use the videotape or the ball machine, and some coaches aren't.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one stat that I'd be interested to look at is how often players make bad calls. Because especially on the juniors, I think it's all throughout, but I think definitely a lot worse in juniors is just the line calling is so bad. And I hope that we get to a point that, and I know this is a different type of technology, but we get to a point where technology can help with this issue, because I think it's something that kind of pushes people away from tennis, is all the on-court dramas and things like that. So anyway, that's a separate thing, but I hope technology can catch up with this.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that technology can help out. I can see the day when almost all courts have the ability to do that. Now, some of the apps out there do line calling. Now, whether the kids stick with it or not is totally different because we got to rely on them. But I mean, like Rublev the other day had a fight with a linesman, was fined quite heavily for it, for making a bad call. We're only human, and our eyes can only see certain speeds and places. Vic Braden pointed that out years ago, that humans are really way off. And as a player, you are the worst one to make line calls because you're running and bouncing and all over the place. And he actually did a study where he showed that if you want to see the ball out, you can see it out. If it's close, you can actually see it out.
100%.
Yeah. So a lot of people aren't really actively cheating. They're passively cheating like that because they want to see it out. Others, even in the college ranks now. That's why they've eliminated let serves.
Right. Yeah, you can convince yourself that a ball is in or it's out in an instant.
Yeah.
What about other technologies that you see? You're in this world, and I know you're particularly in the stats and analytics world, but what about other technologies that you see coming into tennis that you're excited about?
Yeah, there are a lot of, and this has been 6 or 7 years now. They've had things you can put on the strings of your racket that will tell you how fast you're swinging, and they do all sorts of sophisticated things like acceleration points and all this, which really can help out a coach and a player understand why they're not developing power or how they're misusing it, too much wrist play or whatever. And all those things, I mean, the world is open to all the technology that can be out there. Some of the apps actually will show you the amount of spin that you've got on the ball, the height that it's going over the net, and it's just going to grow exponentially over the next 10 years because I think people have to start using all this first to find out what's important and what people really want. I think that's one of the major problems with the industry is that if you consult somebody like you that's a pro that's very sophisticated, you're going to want a lot different information than mom and dad. So what's developed for which level? And then how do you collect the information? Do you rely on video? Do you rely on mom and dad's phone on the thing. Technology, as it gets better and better, will allow people to do more and more with it. And then on top of that, how do you get people to understand what they've just collected? That is one of the key things that I think keeps the industry behind. Because if I'm doing basketball and I'm keeping track of free throws, that's pretty simple. But what about people like that lady from Iowa? Whoa, she just
Right.
broke the all-time. Yeah. Wow. I mean, she shoots threes from everywhere. Well, so how do you keep track of people who shoot 3 points? Because I think one of the key things in coaching is that if you're playing a match, how many times do players stop using their strengths because they've made some mistakes? They've got a big first serve, but oh no, I can't do that. I better just put it in. Or they stop using their forehand, they stop going to the net or whatever, and they give up on their strengths. Well, if you knew that your strength was your forehand or ground stroke or whatever, you would use it no matter what, because you know that if that doesn't work, there's not much else to fall back on.
Right. Do you offer any kind of trainings for parents or coaches or anyone that's using RacketStats to do just that, to look at what to do with the information, basically?
We don't yet, and that's one of my goals is I think as an industry, we need to educate parents on what's available and how to use it. And I think we can work as an industry to do that. It doesn't have to be RacketStats or Ion Court or at different levels. I mean, Warren Pretorius has courses now that you can take to not only use the information, but to get it and how you can collect all this stuff. So he's way ahead of almost everybody else in the industry when it comes to that level. But he's a very sophisticated level. And this would take somebody like you as a coach with a player that's either highly ranked in the state or that's from that up to be able to use it. Because for the 10 and 12-year-old, what are you going to do with it? We really want to know the basics. So you see, there are different levels of collection. There are different levels of inputting it. It's very sophisticated. But the bottom line is, if you don't know what you just got, it's pointless. It's useless.
Yeah. Now, why do you think, why is everyone not doing this? What's your theory?
They don't know about it is one, which is major. And that's one of my goals is just like on there, is to try and get people to be aware of it. Coaches are very stubborn generally, and they adapt to new things very slowly, which is fine. And it's going to be the parents that do it, but the parents don't know this stuff is out there. So by educating pros, I'm hoping that eventually they can say, hey, Mrs. Smith, you got little Annabelle here. She's going to tournament stuff. I can't be there, but you know what? There's some apps out there. And maybe you might look at them, and that way you can send me back the information and I'll be able to help her out better, which is where this thing is going. So coaches got to know about it because they're the main communicators with the industry. The industry should be offering, like the USPTA, the PTR, the PTM programs should be offering basic courses in what analytics is and what we've gone through right now. There are 3 different levels. So educating those future pros through PTM programs, educating all the pros through the PTR, which is, but they've got 15, 20,000 people, and so is the USPTA. They can at least make them aware of it. And then after that, we've got to get the parents to find stuff they like. And that's where I suppose capitalism comes in, because parents should have a choice of 20 different apps that they can look at and decide on their own which one is more valuable to them.
Right. Thank you so much. That's so important. And I hope that you continue to grow this. Before I let you go, if you don't mind sharing with us what's been the Grand Slam and the double bagel moment of your career.
When I was in England, I was asked to be the director of the exhibition court for the Federation Cup. It was the last Fed Cup that was held in one spot. So they built us a temporary court. And on that court, we did fast serve contests, keeping the ball in play against a bunch of rebound nets, obstacle courses. We did all sorts of stuff. And we came up with it, and then we got people to come in and help us run them. That was the highlight. We had some 11,000 people come through that exhibition court. Sue Mappin and her team, Orient, got the whole thing involved. Princess Di was the sponsor, the royals that was behind it.
Oh.
It was marvelous. This is in Nottingham. in England, and it was just a marvelous event.
Wow.
So they had an official, Sue had arranged for a special rose to be cultivated called the Fed Cup rose. It was neat. I suppose what every pro goes through, you work at a facility where every pro does their own thing, and it's very difficult to control lessons or the backstabbing that kind of goes on there. When I was, again, going back to England, I was hired to open up this facility down in Chiswick. And because I was running courses for tennis pros, because I won't go into the LTA was the only one who could certify coaches. So I brought in an alternative method based on what I'd done with the PTR through Dennis Vandermeer. So as I said before, the best tennis coaches in the world may not be the ones who are most talented. We need people bringing people in. Well, a lot of times their talented coaches are working with a higher level, but not down at the bottom. Anyway, so we ran courses for anybody who wanted to be a tennis pro, and they would teach at their local court or whatever, that left it to their devices. So we ran courses on that. Well, when I was hired as the director on this, I actually hired people who had been on the courses, who understand a general philosophy on how to coach, so that if you were taking a lesson from me and I couldn't make it for some reason, you could easily go and get a lesson from any of the others, and they would know what I know. So we could interchange lessons. Yeah. The other thing is, because you were talking with Laura down at the USPTA Flora about women in coaching, I have never been someplace where I did not have several lady coaches. And people ask me, well, how did you work them into, because we know this is pretty demanding job because you're working evenings and weekends and stuff. Well, one was married and one wasn't. Now, the lady who wasn't is willing to coach anytime, and she was booked. I have never seen, I think you brought it up with Laura, lady coaches appeal to a whole different group of people. And there are men that'll take lessons from lady that will not take a lesson from a guy. And there are ladies in the same thing. And Bob, they don't have to be just teaching little kids. So they appeal to a little bit of everybody, and they bring in their own business. Yeah. So the one that was married, we just had to restrict her teaching, and she was in control of it. I can do because of blah, blah, blah. And so we worked around that. And I think that's what you've got to do, because you're not going to stop ladies from getting married and having families and all that. That's not the point. The point is you can be an active teaching professional and have a marriage and a family or whatever.
Exactly. And we need to figure out how to make it easier to sustain that type of diversity in the industry, right? So that we can keep women in the coaching world, whether they have a family or not. So, well, thank you so much, Andy. How can people find you if they want to reach out to you, if they have questions about RacketStats or anything that you talked about today?
I encourage anybody who's interested, give me a call. You can reach me on an email of info@racketstats.com. And you can always get in touch with me that way. And I encourage anybody who's using an analytics thing, if they've got questions that they don't understand the app. I know enough about the other apps because I've researched them, that hopefully I can help them, because I know a lot of times you can't get in touch with people who've got the apps. There's no contact person, because we're all kind of doing this on a budget. So we don't have a staff that can answer phones and all that sort of thing. So if you have any trouble with analytics, let me know. All
right, great. Thank you so much. And best of luck with growing RacketStats. We hope to see all the parents using it.
Well, good. And I'm thankful that you've let me on here. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Vida Tennis. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and got some nuggets of information to use. Let me know what's your favorite technology nowadays. You can visit our website for all things Vida Tennis, including how to reach me. And of course, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And there's also a lot of interesting conversations and comments happening on LinkedIn, of all places. So if you're there, make sure you add me. I hope you have a great week enjoying the Miami Open, and I will see you next time.